Welcome to Direct Supply's Continuing Education webinar series. Direct Supply offers monthly webinars on a variety of topics throughout the year. The topic for today is tackling staffing challenges with modern engagement practices. My name is Robin Malik, and I will be facilitating today's meeting. Please note, the information contained in this presentation is intended to provide general information, but not advice about certain regulations and initiatives. This is not intended as legal or other advice, and each situation may vary depending on the particular facts and circumstances. You should not act upon this information without first consulting with qualified legal counsel. Today's webinar will be presented by Mark Woodka. Mark is the CEO of OnShift, a leader in human capital management software for post-acute care and senior living. In this role, he works closely with providers on strategic staffing initiatives to increase efficiencies and control labor costs while improving resident care. Mark has over 25 years of experience in enterprise software executive management, sales, and marketing, having worked for startup organizations as well as Fortune 500 companies. Mark has been a frequent speaker on staffing strategies for operational, financial, and quality improvements, and has authored articles on long-term care trends and issues. And now, please welcome Mark.
Thank you, Robin. I'm Mark Woodka. As Robin mentioned, I'm the CEO of OnShift, and I'll be presenting today. First, I want to thank you all for taking time out of your busy days to attend. I know how busy and chaotic it can be running a community, so I appreciate the time. And hopefully we'll share some nuggets of information with you that you can take back to the community and put into practice fairly quickly. So I'll dive right in. So I want to talk about the three staffing myths, and a lot of times people, challenge the fact that these are myths, and I'll talk a little bit about it. But one of the things we hear from candidates a lot is they can't source enough candidates to fill openings. There just aren't enough workers out there, and so it presents a challenge in getting open positions filled. In fact, right now, it takes about 39 days on average to fill an opening from the date a person is termed until a new person is hired and on the floor. And then we hear frequently that, well, because I'm short-staffed, I have to use overtime and agency to achieve my staffing goals, to either hit my regulatory or internal budget objectives. And so we're going to talk a little bit about each of these and some strategies to help mitigate some of the challenges that these present. So today what we want to do is focus on modern recruiting and onboarding strategies to help you quickly assimilate new staff, reducing turnover in the first 90 days, and as most people know, that's when a lot of the turnover happens. We'll dive into labor cost management and staff utilization tactics to make sure you're getting the most out of the workforce that you have. A lot of people tend not to pay a lot of attention to utilization, and it's a great area where you can pick up some additional hours, and we'll go through some examples of that, and then discover how to boost your organization's culture and implement engagement strategies. So once you get people, if we're able to get more people in the door, let's make sure they're not running out the back door and reducing turnover and improving retention. So those are our objectives for today. So success is driven by an engaged workforce. This is a poll from the Gallup organization. This is on publicly traded companies because the data is available. But organizations that had engaged employees had higher profitability, higher customer ratings, higher productivity, lower turnover, and less absenteeism. So all very, very positive business impacts if you can get to the point where you have a truly engaged workforce. So it's very important to think about that because it boosts overall business performance. So we're living in kind of a different time right now. As you guys know, labor is your number one operating expense. It's really the only dial you can turn to adjust your cost structure. I think everybody's eked out as much as they can out of food and supplies, et cetera. But there's some challenges. We're at the lowest unemployment rate we've been at in over 20 years. In July, the unemployment rate dipped down to 3.9%, so we're under 4%. So there's not a lot of people out there looking for jobs. It's more competitive. There are more choices, more places to work. We have situations where Amazon is opening up distribution centers and paying $16.50 an hour as a starting wage. That's very hard to compete with, caring for an elderly person for $13 an hour as an alternative. Turnover is very high. Published numbers indicate certified nurse assistant turnover, the median is about 51%. What we see is line staff, so caregivers, dietary, housekeepers, can be much closer to 100%, if not over. So turnover is a huge problem. We have open positions that are going unfilled. In April of this year, there were 32,500 jobs that were open but went unfilled, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And we're projected to face a looming shortage, and it's really hitting us. I think the point of the 32,000 open jobs in April is we're already experiencing that shortage. But it does nothing but grow between now and 2030. So we're projected to be short 2.5 million workers across senior living and long-term care by 2030 and 260,000 registered nurses by 2025. Now, good news, if there is any there, is millennials are going to nursing school in much higher numbers than their predecessor generations. The bad news is there aren't enough nursing schools for them to attend. So there's a big build going on of creating nursing colleges. And as you know, margins are low, right? In skilled, the average margin is 0.7%. So getting your arms around labor is a hugely impactful process and program in your business. So, and this also leads to some business issues, right? So we've got this cycle of, we don't have enough people, we have a hard time hanging on to them. So we're seeing increases in voluntary overtime, increases in staff turnover because we're burning staff out, right? They're getting tired, they're working double shifts, they're working short staff. We're seeing a big increase in the use of temporary staff. And agency, one of the challenges we see is once you let agency personnel in the building, that becomes the easiest way for the building to fill openings. And so we've seen a trend where agencies are getting in, they're making providers signing long-term contracts, claiming you're not going to get resources from me if you don't commit to a 12-month contract. And so then we're seeing people that are managing agency staff first and their own staff. So don't let that happen to you. Make sure you're ahead of that. And then it also has business impacts other than just cost and turnover, difficulty completing documentation, inability to expand services. So that's a revenue impact. If you want to offer some ancillary services and you can't because you can't get enough staff, that hurts the top line while you're being hurt on the bottom line by paying overtime and agency, et cetera, right? And then increased complaints from staff and residents. Things can lead to move-outs, again, increased turnover. So it is a pretty difficult cycle that we're in, and a lot of people are struggling. However, others are really thriving in this environment. What they're doing is focusing on cost control, what they can do to reduce turnover, how they can improve care. And if you do all those first three things, it does lead to better occupancy, right? If you're producing high-quality care, you've got a stable staff, your cost structure's in line, you're going to be kind of a magnet for residents and improve your occupancy. So what we see as the common thread of the providers that are thriving today is really understanding today's workforce and gearing their efforts towards that workforce. So a couple quick stats, 74% of millennials expect their employers to provide flexible schedules. They want better work-life balance, right? 70% of employees cite some degree of financial stress. And if you think about it, most of your employees, the line staff, again, the dietary, the housekeepers, the caregivers, are making between $11 and $14 an hour. It's hard to live on that in this country, and many of them are single parents on top of that. 80% want feedback real-time versus traditional performance reviews. We'll talk a little bit more about modern survey techniques, but I know a lot of providers today are still doing the annual survey, which really doesn't meet the need. 48% of employees are more likely to stay with a company that acts upon their feedback. So if you are soliciting feedback, please make sure you're taking action on it. It's almost worse to receive feedback and do nothing than to not solicit the feedback to begin with. So how do you meet the expectations of today's workers? They're looking for work-life balance. As I mentioned, some flexible scheduling. They want to have a voice and know that they have some impact on the organization because they want to be part of the solution. They like to be recognized. They like very frequent feedback. They want to work in a collaborative environment, and they want to build strong relationships. So that's kind of the new workforce we're dealing with. We're going to talk more about that in just a minute, but I believe, Robin, first we have a poll we'd like to put up. And please answer which of the following is your biggest workforce challenge? Okay, the poll is ended. We'll come back to the results in just a little bit. So one of the challenges we see is we're dealing with a multi-generational workforce. It's the first time kind of in the history of our business that we have 4 to 5 generations in our buildings, including our residents, right? And they have different approaches to life and to work. So the veterans, the pre-1945, they respect authority and leadership hierarchy. They've got a strong work ethic, though they don't need a lot of motivation. Baby boomers have kind of a love-hate relationship with authority. We're very defined by our work. We tend to work harder than most other generations. The Gen Xers mistrust authority. They want constant feedback. They want input. They want to see decisions by consensus as opposed to kind of a hierarchical command and control structure. And the millennials have a really relaxed view of authority. They want quick responses. They want to be entertained and stimulated, and they really thrive on teamwork. And in many cases, we're seeing in an individual community 3 or all 4 of these generations participating in the workforce. And they all, as I said, they approach things a little bit differently. They learn differently. They want to be managed differently. And so I think our challenge as managers is to really understand who's in our building and adapting our style to deal with each of the different generations that we're working with. But I want to spend some time on millennials because they're making up an increasingly large component of our workforce. So this is a survey that was released by Bank of America a few years ago. I thought this was quite funny. They love their phone. 96% of them said their phone is the most important product in their lives. It beat out toothbrushes and deodorant that came in at distant seconds at 93 and 90%. So that's a pretty interesting statistic. So just know that's a real challenge. And why we bring this up is increasingly there are a lot of the people recruiting. So we did a survey with our Genum last year on would you consider a career in the senior living industry, and then we sorted the results by generational cohort. The baby boomers, 11% would. The Gen X is 14%, but the millennials were 22%. So almost twice as likely as the baby boomers to consider senior living as a career. And the number actually almost doubled. It went into the low 40s if they had some experience in a community. So if they volunteered there when they were in high school, worked at dietary when they were in high school, their grandparents were living in a senior living community, that yes went up to the low 40%. So they really were interested if they had some experience and some exposure to us. So today, 70% of new hires in 2018 will be millennials. That's who's making up an increasingly large component of our workforce. Yet, based on a survey we did recently, only 35% of providers have changed their tactics to attract and engage millennials. Again, I think a lot of us take the approach that we're a hammer and everything's a nail, and all nails are treated equally, and that just isn't going to work in this environment. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about how to attract talent. I think one of the most important things that a lot of providers don't think about is your brand. And your brand not just for your residents, but your brand for your employees. Your brand matters. These people want to work in an organization they're proud to be part of. I don't know if you saw the Brookdale ads a couple of years ago that featured their caregivers in ads. Those were fantastic ads. And they did a great job of building the brand for Brookdale with employees as well as with residents. So know that your brand is important. And the reason that it's important is a candidate is looking at a lot of different resources before they ever make an application or a decision on who they want to apply to. Now, this data is across healthcare. I couldn't get it for just long-term post-acute care. But if you look at the number of resources that they're using and reviewing before they apply for a job, it's pretty significant. So if you're not out there with some brand content in the right places, you're going to miss out on a lot of good employees. Messaging is very, very important. If you're trying to attract millennials to your workforce, you've got to craft the right message. And I think part of that is ask some of the people you have on your team, why did you join here? What do you feel our mission is? How do you feel about the organization? What would have attracted you to the organization, or what did attract you to the organization? And help get some feedback from them in crafting your message. So I think this is a very mission-oriented workforce, population. So organize that. I think as an industry, we're very closely aligned with, we have a great mission. We have a great story to tell about caring for our nation's elderly and making their lives better, improving the lives of people with dementia, et cetera. So it's really a good story. We need to make sure we're sharing that story. And share it, on social media. That's where the candidates are. Videos are a great way to attract attention. Very short, little introduction videos of what's a day in a life here at my community, or what do we care about at the community. If you have millennials or you are one, the screen time is pretty significant. The amount of time that's spent on YouTube, the stats are kind of off the charts on that. So also think about sell sheets. Why should someone come to work for you? You really need to be thinking, I need to be marketing to candidates probably almost as much, if not more, than I'm marketing to potential residents or the children of potential residents to get them into the building. Use the millennials you have as your megaphone. Help them get the word out, right? They're living on social media platforms. You can create a referral program. You consider bonuses or raises to people that provide referrals. We had one customer that gave a 25-cent raise for every person that a person referred was hired, and they kept that raise as long as that person stayed at the organization. So not only did they bring their friends in, they had an incentive for them to stay there. So that's basing it kind of on the tenure of the new people. There's a lot of ways to do that. It doesn't have to be a raise. It could be a bonus. It could be just recognition. A lot of times people just like to be recognized for the things they do to help an organization. Think about having brand ambassadors. So who of your team really loves working for you, is helping to bring in referrals, and can get the message out on social media platforms. They can post things on Facebook or like things that they see out there that relate to you, the work that they do, et cetera, and really get that out there to get as much social impact as you possibly can. Also make sure you're going where the candidates are. I can't tell you how many times I ask people, are you promoting jobs on Facebook or Instagram, and the answer is no. Frequently we have a sign in front of the yard that says help wanted, or we're putting ads in Craigslist. That can work, but I think it's much better if you're out on the social media outlets that you have available to you. If you are going to advertise on Facebook, make sure you have a Facebook careers page. You don't want to use your main page to list all your openings. That could be viewed as negatively by potential residents or family members if they go, look at your Facebook homepage and it's got 37 openings, always, right? So don't do that. Have a separate careers page on Facebook that you can promote your openings on. And also use things like Twitter to tweet about news and events within your organization. More and more we're seeing Instagram being used as a way to promote jobs and openings and recruit people. McDonald's just did a big deal with Instagram about 6 months ago to put a lot of their jobs out on that platform. And that's one of the platforms that is growing in usership while Facebook is shrinking a little bit. But the net is you got to go where the candidates are, or you're always going to struggle to get enough candidates. Don't always just focus on the work itself. You can promote fun. This is an example of Summerby Senior Living. Posted a video of two women dancing. I don't remember the song, but over the course of less than a week, it had 28 million views, which is amazing. It had over 500,000 views after the second day. Now, you don't want your team to be running around willy-nilly with videoing people on their phones and posting it out on the internet. You have to have some policies around that. You probably have to have consent from the residents to do that. But it's a great way to get the word out. This is a fun place. It can be a fun industry. And we're doing great things to help, our nation's seniors. They actually got coverage on the local radio, Cosmopolitan Online, USA Today, and the Today Show. So it was very interesting. It just went viral, and they got a lot of attention out of it. So it was a great move from their perspective. Make sure you're paying attention to Glassdoor. I think a lot of the providers I talk to are not as familiar with this as they should be. It's a website where employees go out and put reviews of your organization out. And most people go to Glassdoor and look at the reviews before they apply in an organization. So they matter. And, people will put out their wage rates. They'll say almost anything. If they had a bad day at work and they quit or they were fired, they could put a really negative review out there. So make sure you're paying attention to what your Glassdoor reviews are. It's really the Yelp of places to work. Now, you're not going to be perfect in Glassdoor. Nobody is. You're going to get negative comments. That's pretty natural, but I think what you want to be able to do is be able to respond to those, both on Glassdoor as well as in interviews. So in a lot of cases, you'll see a negative comment on Glassdoor, and the organization will say something like, I'm sorry you had a bad experience, we wish we could have done things differently, we apologize, whatever. So if you address those things, I don't think anybody has an expectation that you're perfect, but if you have 20 really negative reviews on Glassdoor and no comments from you, it looks like you don't care. Also be prepared in an interview to talk about negative things on Glassdoor if they come up, or if you think somebody has looked at it, say, there's some negative stuff on Glassdoor, let me explain kind of what happened from our perspective and steps we took to make sure that doesn't happen again. If you do have people that are really happy, if somebody comes in your office and says, hey, I had a great day today because, the teamwork here was phenomenal, suggest they put that on a Glassdoor. You don't want to actively recruit people to write things on Glassdoor because there's kind of a line there of, truth. But if people come to you with positive things, encourage them to say, hey, that'd be great to have on our Glassdoor page to help us recruit people. Because generally your employees want to recruit good people. They want to recruit enough people so that the workload isn't bad, and they're willing to help out. So here's an example of a Glassdoor review. First and foremost, it's entitled No Surprise, That's Not Good. It was 2 stars. It's a former employee. They don't recommend the company, and they disapprove of the CEO. And those are standard questions that Glassdoor asks is, would you recommend this to a friend, and do you approve of the CEO? And so it's how long did they work there, the pros and cons, and then the advice to management. And that's what a standard Glassdoor review looks like. This is obviously a negative example to make the point, but that's what's out there. So make sure you are aware of Glassdoor. Also, you can take ownership of your Glassdoor page, and you can put content out there and recruit through Glassdoor. Glassdoor was recently purchased by Indeed, which I'm sure you're all using for posting job openings, so those two will be coming together in the not-too-distant future. Make job applications really simple. I think, historically we've tried to get enough information to weed people out early in the process. In an environment where we don't have as much supply as we did 5 or 10 years ago, I think you want to get as many people into the net as you can and weed them out, as you go through the process. So we're seeing a 60 to 120 second application as kind of the optimal solution. If you go over 2 minutes, the drop-off rate is huge. If you can get it done in a minute, that's perfect. It should be absolutely able to be done on a mobile device because that's where these candidates are, and that's the only computing device they own in a lot of cases. They don't have computers at home. They're carrying around a smartphone, largely an Android smartphone, and that's where they want to do everything. So make sure you've got a very short application process. You get them into the pool very quickly. You can narrow things down once you get them in the pool. So very basic questions, the essentials, name, address, work history, any certifications, and kind of they're in. Now, once you have the candidate pool, right, make sure you're following up with them, and now you can start working on weeding out candidates, right? So, what do they like about working on a team? What do they expect to get out of the job? One of the best practices we've seen really working is include different roles in the interview, and there's 2, I think, that are key. One is a peer. So if they come in to interview for a caregiver role and they're talking to a nurse supervisor or the HR person, have a peer give them a tour of the community. 2 things about that. Number one is they'll say things to that peer that they would never say to a supervisor or an HR person. The peer can ask them questions. Hey, why'd you leave your last job? What didn't you like about it? And then at the end of that, you can ask them, would you like to work with this person, right? Do you think this person would be a good team member? If they say no, right, don't hire them. The other thing is to have residents interact with them. We've had a couple providers that do their interviews in the dining room, and they have a resident stop by to say hi to the supervisor, and they introduce the person that's being interviewed, and the resident sits down and talks to them for a minute. They then get a sense of how do they interact with residents. And you can ask the resident later, hey, how would you feel if that person worked here and was one of the people that provided for your care? So it's really a good way to get a few more eyeballs on a candidate and get a better sense of, are you getting someone that will actually fit into the organization and stay there. And make sure you follow up. I'm going to talk about engaging with candidates in a minute, but if you're in the millennial age group, they don't know that smartphones, you can actually talk on them, right? If I have 2 millennials of my own, if I called them right now, they wouldn't answer their phone. If I texted them in 10 seconds, I would get an immediate response. It's happened over and over and over again, so make sure you're communicating with them in the method they want. And so we did a test last year with a couple customers on, 2 comments. We can't find enough candidates. We can't hire fast enough. So we dove into that with a couple customers, and what we found almost universally across the customers were they were waiting far too long to process applications, right? They would get applications or resumes. They'd print them out. From Saturday to Tuesday, they'd pile up, and then on Tuesday, the supervisor, the HR person would start calling and leaving voicemails, right, to people that aren't going to answer the phone or listen to their voicemail. So it was a very slow process, and we weren't getting any candidates through. We switched to a text-based process, and what we found was we were able to get 2 times the hires in half the time. So what we did for that was, as soon as someone applied, we sent them a text message saying, hey, thanks for applying. We'd love to get you in for an interview. Can you come in tomorrow? They would reply. We'd confirm the interview by a text message. The day before, we would send them a message reminding them of the interview the following day. And the day of, we would remind them again, saying, hey, we're really looking forward to meeting you at 2 o'clock today. Please be on time. Please bring these things with you. And we were really shocked at the impact that had. And so one of the stats that I think you need to make sure you really get ingrained in your organization is good candidates are off the market in 4 to 5 days. So if I have someone apply on Saturday and I wait until Tuesday to reach out to them, they're probably already either deeply involved in a process with someone or hired by someone else. So you've got to improve the speed at which you manage candidates and improve the engagement experience. When we did the research on this and did the test, we interviewed every candidate that came in for an interview, and to a person they said, wow, this organization really seems like they care about me. I can't believe how different it was and how excited they seemed to have me come in and interview. It really made me feel good. It made me feel like this organization really wanted me. And all you need to do is be the one that gets the good candidates and gets them fast, right? In your geography, you just want to be the one that gets the candidates as quickly as possible. I think I'm seeing a lot of people looking outside of the industry to broaden the candidate pool. People have always gone to other healthcare settings, but look at other settings that fit. Hospitality is kind of a natural one, right? We are in a form of the hospitality industry, although we're really healthcare, but people that understand customer service are good fits. We have a customer that's hiring executive directors out of Target, former general managers, because they're used to dealing with a multi-generational workforce, a very transient workforce. They understand customer service, and so the organization that I'm speaking of feels that they can teach them the healthcare side of the business as a senior living provider, but it's hard to teach them the soft skills about customer service, managing that workforce, et cetera. So we've gone through kind of some ideas on how to recruit, how to get applicants into the process. Let's assume we've hired some people now, and let's talk about how we hang on to them. So turnover is a big thing, and again, this is from a survey we did with our Genum last year. And if you look at when turnover happens, 40% of turnover in senior care happens in the first 90 days of employment. That's a huge number. If you go to the first 6 months, you're at 64%. So we're losing a vast majority of our workforce in the first year of employment, and a big piece of that in the first 3 to 6 months. And so we're just going to stay on this vicious cycle of spending money to recruit, to hire, to onboard, to get residents familiar and comfortable with people, just to start over again. So stemming that flow of turnover and improving our retention should be a top goal for us as an industry. So let's talk about onboarding. And actually, when we talk to people about why they leave, the onboarding approach or not doing a good job of onboarding is really a really high item. So especially for the younger generation, offer online learning. They don't like to sit in classrooms for 3 or 4 or 6 hours or 3 days, which a lot of providers, onboarding programs are like that. Engage them with more quick hit content, shorter sessions, so you're not spending 3 days in a room. Spend 2 to 4 hours. And if you've got a group of people coming into the organization, and I know a lot of providers do group onboarding with people, give them some time to socialize. Give them an hour at the end of the day to go get a beer together or hang out together on the clock. So they get to know people in the building and have some friends that are working there right out of the gate, because that can help reduce turnover because they feel like they're connected with someone. That's another reason we hear all the time on why people leave early. It's like, I was hired, I never really got aligned with the mission of the organization, I didn't have any friends or contacts there, and I just felt isolated. And so I was uncomfortable, and I ended up leaving, right? Another way to address that is with a mentor program. Take some of your higher performing employees, it could be a certified nurse assistant, have them as a mentor. That could be the person that does the interview when they come in, does the peer interview, and then when somebody's hired, they take them under their wing for 60 or 90 days and coach them and help them, kind of day in and day out, get into the organization, understand what they need to do, and that way they've got a friend. And the mentors can make a little bit extra money for doing that role and get some recognition for it, which is generally good and can go to kind of a career path for some of your line staff and really help out. We've got one customer who their mentors have a mental checklist. It's not mental, it's a real checklist of 28 behaviors they need to see exhibited before a new employee comes out of probation. And they'll go for 30 days, and if the person's not out, they'll go for another 30 days, and if they're not seeing the behaviors, then that person gets terminated generally. So they're also, so pay attention to what do you really need to see out of a new employee in the first month or two to be comfortable that they're going to be a good employee and take good care of your residents. And so they're operating that program through their caregiver mentor program. As I mentioned, career tracks can be really important. I think nobody in this day and age is really just looking for a job, or very few people are. They're looking for a career. So to the extent you can design career tracks for each position and show them that they have a future and somewhere to go, that will help. I think, A, get them to come on to your organization to begin with, but B, be upwardly mobile and be able to, see a path forward. And, I doubt people say, I want to be a dishwasher for the rest of my life, or I want to be a caregiver for 30 years. Some people do, and God bless them for that, because the world needs those people. But if people think they've got a place to move, and especially the millennial generation who does like to move fairly quickly, you've got to be able to identify where they can go and give them some measurable goals. If you're here for 6 months and you've done these 3 or 4 things, we could make you a mentor, we could make you a senior caregiver, et cetera. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken to an executive director or a CEO of a company that has told me they started out as a CNA and worked their way up. We've got one customer who has 80 buildings now, who started as a CNA, got his nursing degree, got his LNHA, ended up buying a building, and now owns 80 of them. So it can be done, and those are great stories to help do that. You can offer career development and training. People do tuition reimbursement. They'll do deals with nursing schools to get people enrolled there. Make sure you periodically review your wage rates. There are a lot of services out on the internet like PayScale. Glassdoor does some of this too, where you can spot check and see what wages are being reported in your region, because you want to make sure you're competitive. If you're paying $12.50 an hour to do something and a competitor down the street is paying $13 a quarter, you're going to get less applicants, because when you make $12.50 an hour, 75 cents an hour is meaningful money. We see a lot of hospitals poaching caregivers, primarily CNAs and nurses, out of the skilled sector. So make sure that you're doing what you can to understand what the competitive nature is in your geography, and that you're competitive from a compensation position. I think, Robin, we're going to roll one more pull out here. So this one is, how often do you survey your staff? Once a year, twice a year, 6, 12, daily, or never? We'll leave that up for about 20 seconds. Okay, we will look for those results a little bit later on, along with the other poll, and we'll share that with you.
They should be up there now. Sorry.
Oh, they are?
Are they working?
I missed them. Hang on.
So far we have 29% with 1 time a year. Okay.
Yeah, 57 said 1 time a year, 11 said 2, 2 people said 6, 3 people said 12, 4 people said daily, good for you, although that might be too much, and 9 people said never. And that's pretty consistent with what we see. The vast majority of people are doing an annual survey, and if you think about it, and if you think about 40% turnover in the first 90 days, by the time you send a survey, get it back, get it collated, figure out what you're going to do with it, put programs in place to take action, you've lost a lot of those people, right? So we're seeing the annual survey kind of go by the wayside as really not being impactful for running the business day to day. So we're big advocates of much more frequent surveys. There's a concept called a pulse survey, which is a frequent 1 or 2 question survey that we've seen work pretty well. You can do that on a systematic basis, where on a regular basis you send surveys out. We have a pulse survey tool that providers use, and they can schedule it, once every 2 weeks, once a week, whatever they want. At shift's end, it'll go out and say, how was work today? And it's got 5 emojis, and you pick you're really happy or really unhappy, and then provide comments. And as I mentioned, if you are going to survey people, you've got to take action immediately. There's nothing worse than soliciting feedback, getting it, and then doing nothing with it. So you've got to be committed organizationally that if you're going to have things that are reported, you're going to have to sit down as a management team and figure out what you're going to do about it. A lot of these pulse surveys are anonymous too, so you won't necessarily know who sent them, although we're seeing a very strong trend to people identifying themselves, even though they're designed as anonymous by default. But one of the benefits of that is you can avoid issues from snowballing. We had a customer who got two specific complaints, two different customers. One was there aren't enough supplies on third shift. Well, they dug into it and found out first and second shift were hoarding supplies in residents' rooms, so they didn't run out. So they got the team together, they figured that out, and they solved that problem, and it made third shift very happy. And don't forget third shift, right? They very infrequently get seen by management. Another one was we had a situation where the director of nursing was writing people up for every infraction, no matter how small. And so a couple comments came through that, we're getting written up on policies we weren't sure were in place, and can she have a conversation with us before she just writes us up? And so that director of nursing sat down with HR and said, okay, give me some guidance. What can I do to get better at this? And that helped prevent some turnover. Again, your employees generally want to stay. They don't like to job hop. It's difficult and painful for them. But if they feel like they have no voice or no input and they've got problems, they have no choice, right? It's better to try somewhere else. So, taking more frequent feedback from the team, I think, is a great way to help reduce turnover. Showing your employees you care. Create a fun committee, do some fun things in the buildings. Look at your break room and think, would you spend any time there? What message does that send to your employees? The cleanliness, the modernness, what do you have in the break room? Is it a place you'd want to go spend 15 minutes in the middle of your workday, or would you go in there and go, ugh, this is junky, right? And if you think about it, you could probably fix up your break room for $1,000 or less and make it a nice environment for your staff to take their breaks in. Think about quarterly events. A lot of providers do summer barbecues, picnics, Halloween parties, holiday parties. Do some things to get them interacting as a team, and make sure, like I said, don't forget you have 3 shifts. The poor night shift frequently gets forgotten about in these things, and that's not good. Also, think about service awards. I've seen them for tenure milestones. I've seen, hey, a resident said a nice thing. I saw you doing a good thing today. Simple things like recognition at stand-up. We have an administrator who keeps a basket of dollar store items in her office, and when she sees somebody doing something good, or a resident or resident family member says, hey, Jane did a great job with my mom today, she says, go on and grab something out of the basket. So it doesn't have to be financially, large. In a lot of cases, it's really just recognition that people care about. So think about doing some of those things. And if you want to take that to the next level, you can actually do a formal recognition program. So think about the behaviors you want to incentivize, people coming to work, not calling off, punching in and out on time, taking good care of the residents, and have actually a points program assigned to that they can redeem the points for something. And again, it doesn't have to be terribly expensive. You can do this pretty inexpensively. And a way to think about this, and I know a lot of people, when we talk about this with customers, say, well, I don't have any money for it. And I said, well, if you could reduce your turnover by 2 staff a month, how much do you think that would save you? And, a lot of people don't see turnover as a line item on their general ledger, so it's hard for them to answer that question. But it costs you between $1,500 and $5,000 for every caregiver that turns over, and $3,500 to $15,000 or more for every nurse that turns over. So you've got the budget there. You're just spending it on hiring people that you're not able to replace people you're not able to hang on to. So that's one way to think about how can I invest in this incentive program, and then track the impact. Did it move the needle on reducing turnover, right? We've seen leaderboards, gamified things. We support that as an organization. Next in line motivation, hey, how close are you to earning a reward? Letting people know, hey, you're only 50 points away this pay period or this month from getting a reward. It gets them kind of going and incented to do something. And you see the quote here, dedicate 1% or more to recognition programs, get a very strong return on investment while reinforcing core values. So again, think about what you can do to recognize your staff. And one of the other things that we hear a lot from staff members is, I go to work every day, I show up on time, I do my job, I take great care of my residents, and guess what? Nobody ever notices. All the attention from management goes to the problem children, right? The people that call off, don't show up for work, show up late, leave early, don't do a good job with residents. The managers spend all the time managing the problems and none of the time recognizing the solutions. So think about that and make sure you're not falling into that. So I want to talk about some of the financial benefits of proper staffing and some ways to look for dollars and cents savings. So staff utilization I talked about at the start, we see this as real low-hanging fruit, especially in larger organizations. So you're hiring people for a certain number of hours. Providers generally have some definition of full-time hours as 37.5 to 40, part-time is 24, and per diem can be 7, 8, or 15, 16, depending on if you're doing 7.5-hour shifts or 8-hour shifts, right? But if you look at your staff and look at the utilization, you may be underutilizing portions of your staff while you're spending money on overtime and agency. So in the example here, we had an average hours worked of 33, 38 was considered full-time, so the staff in this case was only 87% utilized. So there's 13% of staff time that's available to be used to fill shifts. And that could be huge. And this is not quite a full shift, but a lot of times we'll see X percent of full-time equivalents are only working 30 hours a week. And they could pick up that extra shift and reduce overtime or reduce staffing agency or reduce the need for staff. And in a lot of cases we see, and this is particularly true in full-time and per diem, in the full-time people, if you're underutilizing them, you're probably providing benefits for them. So you're paying more in benefits costs for them. If you're underutilizing them, you're paying more if you're using agency or overtime to fill those shifts. So that's kind of a double negative there. And in a lot of cases, we see the per diem staff just not utilized at all. And then they leave. They don't stick around because they're not getting any shifts. So they're there because you need them to fill gaps, but focus on utilizing those two pools of your workers as effectively as you can. So we see a per diem policy as a benefit, which means, hey, if I'm going to hire a per diem person, I'm going to give them at least 8 or 16 hours a week and focus on filling openings or call-offs with per diem people. Again, assuming you're hitting your full-time equivalents target hours as closely as you can, but make sure the building knows what the expectations are around usage of per diem workers. You probably want to communicate that out to people. You want to make sure the people in the buildings know and make sure that you have a monitoring in place to say, hey, are we using our per diem staff effectively or not, or they won't get utilized, and again, they just tend to kind of drift away. Think about scheduling. As I mentioned before, especially the millennial generation is looking for more transparency in scheduling. We had a customer in North Carolina who scheduling was a number 1, 2, or 3 complaint in each of their communities because it was done on paper. It didn't seem fair. Nobody knew why Mary got all the overtime, and other people didn't get to pick up extra shifts, and so they made it more transparent and automated, and that problem went away. It's important to know the work preferences and availability of your staff. I can't tell you how many times somebody has quit, and they've quit because they've told their employer, hey, I'm taking classes on Thursdays, so I can't work on Thursdays, and they get scheduled every Thursday. And then they either have to tell them they can't come in, or worse, they will call off on Thursday and not show up because they need to be where they need to be for school. So try to make it as transparent as possible. Make it accessible on the mobile device. That's a huge win for employees, and it's funny because I'll talk to providers, and they'll say, well, why is that important? And I'd say, well, when you post a schedule, and most people still post a schedule somewhere in the community, I said, watch what your employees do. They will walk up to it, pull their phones out, and take a picture of it, right? Because they're going to copy it down onto their personal calendar on their phone later if they don't have an app that has it. So it's very easy to get mobile apps with the schedules on them, and that could be a differentiator in hiring as well to say, look, we have your work-life balance right in your pocket on your mobile device. And try to work as much as you can in repeatable schedules. And what that really means is work in repeatable paychecks. So if you think about it, if I'm trying to get 10 shifts in a 2-week pay period and end up getting 5 one week and 3 the next, I've just given up on 20% of my take-home pay. And again, if I'm making $13 an hour, that's a meaningful amount of money that I've given up on. So as much as you can, try to make sure you've got fairly repeatable schedules so people have an expectation of what their income is going to be pay period in and pay period out. Be fair and transparent with shifts. Let people request when they want to fill and where. Try to fill call-offs equitably. I think a standard that we see is the scheduler knows which 5 people will pick up shifts or which 3, and they call them first. That's great for those 3 people who end up getting all the overtime and all the extra work, but not everyone in your community will pick up extra shifts, but the 80-20 rule kind of applies. 20% probably will, but only 3 or 4% of them are being offered the shifts. So you can make it more equitable, distribute that more fairly. Again, here's another way to use mobile technology to communicate out to people about openings and get them filled quickly. And also, when you're filling an open shift, consider your overtime risk. again, it's not just who puts their hand up first or fastest. It's, all right, Steve is willing to work, but he's already worked 30 hours this week. He's scheduled for another 16. He's already in overtime. Do I want to give me more hours of overtime? Is there a better choice that I can choose other than Steve to make sure that I'm not incurring excess costs? And if you look at where overtime comes from, last-minute call-offs is a huge problem. You're under the gun to get the shift filled, right? But that's where you want to be really smart. People punching in and out early and late, everyone knows if they punch in 7 minutes or greater early or 7 minutes or greater out, they earn a quarter hour, until they do get to 22 minutes and they earn a half hour. So, watch for the clock riders because that's happening. And then 74% of people think not having enough staff is leading to overtime. But again, when we dig into the utilization, almost without fail, we'll find an opportunity to reduce that by working people the number of shifts we hired them to work. So make sure you've got a plan to fill open shifts. Be proactive. I can't tell you how many times people get to Thanksgiving week and go, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? It's Thanksgiving. I got news for you. It comes at the same time of the year in and year out. By November 1st, you ought to be thinking about what you're going to do to fill shifts Thanksgiving week, right? So make sure you're on top of that. Be predictive with your staffing levels. I think a lot of providers have an opportunity to flex their staff more than they do. We're seeing people do a staffing ladder or an hours per resident day type calculation. If you, to the extent you have visibility and census fluctuations, you can adjust. If I have, 3 discharges on Friday and it's Tuesday, I should look at my staffing plan for Friday and figure out, do I need all the caregivers and nurses I have or dietary and housekeepers? Maybe I can cut some shifts, and maybe I can get some people projected into overtime that I could cut those shifts and help reduce my costs. On the inverse, I might have 3 check-ins coming that day or 4. I might be short-staffed. I might need to recruit more staff to come in to make sure I'm properly staffed. But your labor cost line item should fluctuate with your revenue line item. There should be a direct correlation between census and acuity and your labor costs. So make sure you're looking forward. Too many times communities look at the payroll reports to determine how they're doing with labor, right? Looking at someone and saying, hey, we had really high overtime last pay period, do better next time, is not the right solution. It's looking out in the future and saying, okay, what does it look like we're going to have for overtime? Let's look at the schedule 2-3 weeks out, see what we have for scheduled overtime, what we can do to eliminate that and reduce it. So get good at flexing, because that's a huge opportunity for savings. As I mentioned, watch out for clock riders, those people that punch in 7 minutes early or punch out 7 minutes late. They can punch their way to overtime very easily. That's very hard to see if you're not on top of it day in and day out. And once you start paying attention to that, naturally a certain percentage of it will go away because there are a level of your staff that are doing it because nobody's watching, and as soon as somebody's watching, they'll stop doing it, right? And there could be a lot of savings to be had in managing this process, and I'll go through some examples of that in just a minute. Look at overtime and agency. A lot of it can be prevented. I think too often we just hear I don't have enough staff, so I have no choices. While that's certainly true to some extent, it's not true to the extent that we see. So we suggest setting overtime goals and monitoring them every day to make sure you're not getting to the end of a pay period and going, wow, we had 8% overtime this pay period. Look and see what you're going to have throughout the course of the pay period to predict it and prevent as much as you can. Again, if you look at what somebody's punched already this week, what they're scheduled for the remainder of the week, you can see fairly early in the work week who's going to end up in overtime and when, right? And you can take corrective action to do it. I think from an agency perspective, that's a tough one. The challenge, I think, is once you allow agency into the building, that's the easiest way for the building to fill shifts. And as I said at the start, we're seeing a lot of agency companies say, oh, you've got to sign a long-term agreement with us and you've got to commit to a certain level of use or we're not going to be able to provide staff for you. I think you want to avoid that to the extent that you absolutely can. You want to avoid that because I'll tell you the practical implication is, and we've seen this happen, is we've run into some organizations that had agency scheduled out between now and the end of the year because the building said we've got to fulfill our contract with them. So they're scheduling agency before they're scheduling their own employees, right? You'd much rather work your own employees, even in overtime, than use outside agency from a cost perspective and a quality of care perspective too. So I think you've got to really, tighten that down and communicate your expectations to the buildings and question and look at why do we have an agency person filling the shift when we have 4 or 5 people that aren't getting full-time hours, or we've got 3 or 4 per diem people that have no hours this week, so that we can manage that. We're seeing a lot of providers build their own internal per diem pool, almost like a mini staffing agency of their own. They'll hire people if they're multi-facility providers in a geography. They'll hire them into the organization and say, you don't have a building you work at. We'll put you at whatever building we need you at, but we'll try to keep you there for a week at a time. And so you're kind of building your own internal agency to fill some of those shifts. This can be a significant cost item. So if you think about a lot of providers, especially on the skilled side, budget labor at an hours per patient day or hours per resident day basis, right? And let's say I'm scheduling for 3.2 PPD, but I'm accidentally hitting a 3.3. That 0.1 overage is costing $75,000 a year in excess labor cost. So it doesn't show up, that it doesn't stand out day in and day out, but over the course of the year it adds up. If it's a 0.2, obviously it's twice that. Overtime can be expensive depending on, is it caregivers and dietary people versus nurses, but a rate reduction of 1%, and that means taking your rate from 5% to 4%, can save $24,000 to $60,000 per building. So huge impact on cost. And again, it's the kind of things you need to manage day in and day out. You can't look at this once a week and expect to move the needle on it. So as we think about some of the benefits, if you're hanging on to your people, getting them on board properly, you're going to have higher quality care. If you're managing overtime at agency and clock creep, you'll get better cost control. If you're a skilled provider, managing staffing letter is a huge input to your 5-star staffing rating. It helps with efficiency improvements within the organization. You've got a better story. You'll have happier staff, and they'll stay as a result. They're more likely to stay. Okay, with that, we'll take some Q&A.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Great information. So the first question that we have is, millennials are always talking about the gig economy. Are there ways to incorporate them in part-time ways, or perhaps options for providing them a second job?
That's a great question, and I think the answer to that is yes. And that's something we look at as an organization of how can we facilitate that. We haven't done anything on that yet, but if you think about it, the gig economy is really a modern version of the staffing agency, if you think about it. So you're hiring a driver from Uber for a trip for a relatively low fee because Uber's not paying that driver twice, what they would pay a regular driver to supply them, which is the staffing agency model. So I absolutely think there are opportunities to do that. You could do it yourselves with kind of the per diem pool idea that I just shared, or you could build a network of available workers, which is something we're looking at as an organization.
Thanks. Next question is, many of our hourly staff are fairly recent immigrants and ESL speakers. I'm guessing they vary significantly from the millennials described here. What are your thoughts on this and how to reach and retain those individuals?
First and foremost, I think that's great that you are getting immigrants in. I think that's an important way to fill our workforce. I think to the extent that, it depends how long they've been here in this country as to how they profile comparative to millennials. But in a lot of cases, the immigrants are a little bit harder working. I would say if ESL is a challenge, make sure you've got someone in the building that can communicate with them effectively to make sure that they understand stuff. And I think reaching out to the population, if you've got some, I don't know what country you're speaking of, let's say you've got some Haitian people working in your building, they're going to be very connected to that community in whatever geography you're in, right? So just getting the word out to them that, hey, we'd love to have more workers. You guys do a great job. Bring your friends and family, and we'll give you extra time off or a referral bonus or whatever. That's a great way to get more workers into the building.
Here's another question for you, Mark. Are individuals more likely to hire on a position that is more a float area or something steady, same area, same time, same day?
That depends a lot on the individual applicant and what they're looking for. I think we have an opportunity to do both. So I think there are people that are looking for full-time work, absolutely. They want the regular, repeatable schedule, repeatable paycheck. But there's also a lot of people that are working second jobs and are looking to pick up a little extra work here and there. And that's why I think it's important if you have open shifts and people request them, fill them as quickly as you can, because that person may be putting requests out to multiple employers. So I think that's definitely happening. I also think we have a huge opportunity to design shorter shifts and attract more people into the workforce. There are 1.2 million people that are unemployed that are no longer looking for work. There's 1.1 million males over the age of 55 that are looking for more work. And our work day doesn't happen in nice 8-hour, 3 8-hour increments, right? We're busy in the morning, we're busy at night. Why not mix some 4-hour shifts in there and try to get people that want to work 12, 16, 20 hours a week to fill those peak times?
All right, thank you. I think that is all of the questions that we have so far.
Great. So thanks for those. We've got a lot of resources on our website, OnShift.com, so you can sign up to get the things that are displayed here. We're going to do a quick overview of our technology stack. I'm going to have Steve Boughton do that. The items that we have in our platform today, and we're not going to cover all these. We'll just do kind of a high level and more from an employee perspective, since that's what we're talking about. Our scheduling solution, Insight, which is a labor analytics platform where we do some of the utilization calculations, PBJ reporting for our customers in skilled, Engage is our employee retention solution, and Wallet is part of our retention strategy where employees can get in advance on up to half of their earned but unpaid wages for a $5 flat fee. That's designed to avoid payday lending interest rates or bounce checks, et cetera. Customers take no risk on that, and it's free. So, Steve, I'll have you cover a couple of these items. Thanks.
Okay, so everybody should be able to see my screen here, and as Mark said, we're going to do just a brief overview of some of the technology that we bring to the market. The first thing that we see here is the scheduling dashboard that a scheduler or an executive director or administrator would see as they're coming through and looking at the different labor information day in and day out as they're coming into OnShift. This dashboard provides a whole host of information. We can see as we scroll down the dashboard, there are notifications, things like shifts that have been automatically approved. So that's one of the things that we want to do is take some of that burden out of the scheduler's hands. And for those folks that are putting their hand up and saying that they want to grab that shift, if they're not going into overtime or projected into overtime for the work period, we can have OnShift automatically go ahead and apply them or put them into that shift. We're also going to alert schedulers to overtime in a variety of ways and give them easy access to reports where they can go in and see where those employees are and when they're going to start going into overtime so they can proactively address those shifts, get ahead of them before they occur, and see if there are other better options to mitigate that cost. We have the task alerts here along the left-hand side of this dashboard, and it really helps prioritize the work of the scheduler. We know that oftentimes they're not in front of the computer 8 hours a day. They're doing other things there within the community, so we want to make it very easy for them to prioritize the things that need to be addressed, quickly address them, and get on with the rest of the tasks that they need to tackle. So they can go through and see things like open shifts to fill immediately, things like overtime that we have projected in the current work period or even out into the next work period as well. Also on the dashboard, we are projecting overtime within the community for the current work period and giving them really ready access down to the individual position level, if needed, of how they're doing from a staffing perspective. So really take into account that HPRD or even service levels or acuity of the residents within the community to see how they're doing from a staffing perspective, both in day and in week, especially taking into account if there are minimums that need to be met within the community as well. So making that very easy to see as they step through that software. We can also look at the Engage dashboard, and this really brings to bear a lot of information around those employees. It gives some insight for the managers as to how the employees are performing here at the top, and we're looking at some of those leading indicators, such as, is the employee coming to work when they're scheduled, or are they calling off? And when they are coming to work, are they punching in on time and punching out on time? So we can easily see who those top performers are from that perspective, give those millennials that quick message of feedback saying, hey, Josephina, you've done a great job. Keep up the good work. I can see that you're doing a great job punching in and punching out this week. On the flip side, we can see who those low performers are, and I want to call out Brittany. She is a newer employee within our community. I can see she's been with us for 45 days. She has this badge that travels along with her photo. So if it's a situation where I need to address this with Brittany, see if she's received all the training that she's expected, or is it just a situation where she had a sick child at home and had to take the day off? So I can try to proactively get ahead of these situations before they occur. One of the things that you'll also note is that we have the opportunity to upload employee pictures. So being able to put a face with a name, especially for those third shift or the night shift workers who may not have the opportunity to deal very much with their senior managers within the community, just really helps build that relationship when those managers can address them by name. We can see a pulse summary, so being able to frequently survey staff, get that actionable feedback by asking them a very simple question as frequently as once a week after one of the shifts that they've completed. And the question is, how was work today? They're presented with a set of emojis ranging from very satisfied to very dissatisfied, and they can choose to add additional feedback. So things like, we're having issues with supplies, or the residents were in a great mood today, they really enjoyed the activity. So giving that actionable feedback because they are the ones closest to the residents working the floor day in and day out. We also have a list of our new employees so we can see when they are beginning to work with our community. We saw the badge that travels along with Brittany, and easily keeping track of who those new employees are to get them over, especially that 90-day hurdle when the vast majority of the turnover occurs. And then finally, we have a reward system, so allowing employees to earn points towards a reward based on those behaviors we want to see modeled within the community. So those things like coming to work when they're scheduled, for punching in on time, for punching out on time, for tenure milestones. So as they're with us 3 months, 6 months, whatever is defined there within the community, they can earn points at those milestones. And then also for responding to surveys. We want to make sure that they know that their feedback is valued there as well. But the OnShift technology is not just limited to the employees, of course, or I should say the managers. We also want to include the employees. And that's one of the things I'm going to show you on my smartphone here is being able for them to have access to their schedule on the go. They can easily see where they are scheduled to work. They can also see things like any open shifts that they may be qualified to pick up. To that earlier point, if this is a shift that I would like to grab, I can go in and see when this shift is open. I can see that it is open on Sunday the 19th from 7 to 3. I want to request this shift, and if this is a situation where I was not projected into overtime, I can go and have that shift automatically added to my schedule there. So didn't have to go through any sort of approvals because I'm not going into overtime and I've grabbed that shift. I can make plans now that I have this shift on my schedule to accommodate that. I can also see my rewards. So to that point with Engage, I can see where my points balance is, where I rank among the community, both in month and for the year, and how I've earned those points. So similar to a credit card or a airline miles, I can see how I'm doing there, earning those rewards. I also have that opportunity to see my performance. So this is an area that we wanted to surface to the employees as well. So giving them that idea of how they've done from a shift's work perspective, from an on-time perspective, and a punch perspective, and really giving them that feedback as to how many call-offs they've had over a certain period of time, making it very easy if a conversation needs to be had because they have that information right at their fingertips. And the other component that we have is the OnShift wallet. Wallet really helps those financially stressed employees by giving them access to earned but not yet paid income. And they have access to up to 50% of that earned but not yet paid income. So if I'm in the middle of a pay cycle and I run into a issue with my car, I've gotten a flat tire that I need to get fixed, I can access my OnShift wallet and go and see how much money is available. So I have access to that, up to half of that earned but not yet paid income. And I can transfer that money for a simple $5 fee to get that tire fixed. So instead of having to go to a payday loan or miss a bill and bounce a check and incur any of those other costs that I may experience, for a simple $5 transaction fee, I can go through and get access to those funds very quickly and easily. I also have the ability to go through and pay bills from the OnShift wallet. So if I wanted to set up other providers, I can go and easily do that. And I also have access to information on financial tutorials, so some helpful tips that are available to me, and also get some assistance in terms of guidance. If I'm financially stressed, I can go and access that through the wallet as well. So a very, very brief overview of the OnShift platform. Certainly, as you have questions, we'd be happy to help you out along the way.
All right. Thank you so much, Steve. Now for anyone interested in seeing a demo of the Direct Supply connected clinical products, please help me welcome the Director of DS Smart Platform at Direct Supply, Peter Klug.
It seemed like a very timely day to present our DS Smart platform, which is a new platform for direct supply, following Mark's presentation on OnShift. There was one stat in particular that I thought was really interesting from his talk. One about in the top 5 reasons that issues that were associated with employee shortages was difficulty completing documentation, and that's really what DS Smart is designed to address. So similar numbers that Mark presented in terms of staffing efficiency being a burning issue in long-term care. We have our clinical leadership conference that we host each year, and about 3 or 4 years ago, we went through a process of trying to identify the biggest issues that clinical leaders were facing in their jobs, and a resounding number 1 was addressing staffing. And we looked at each other at Direct Supply and said, okay, what products and services do we have that really address the staffing issue in our portfolio? And we shrugged a little bit because nothing really came to mind that directly affected staffing. So we put our heads together and we created a solution that you'll see here to really help connect all the devices, all the clinical devices that we sell to the electronic medical record, using a cloud in the background and a app on a mobile device as the interface at the bedside for the caregiver. So why does this matter? Why is this important? That difficulty in completing documentation generally happens because the current process is somebody walks into a resident room with a vital sign monitor or takes a manual blood pressure with a stethoscope and a cuff. And then writes down the information, writes down the patient name, and then goes to the next room and probably gets through 3 or 4 residents before they're distracted by something that really needs taking care of, right? Some emergency or person that needs help getting to the bathroom or whatever, or getting out of bed, whatever it might be. And then they have that sheet of paper and they stick it in their pocket. And sometime before the end of their shift, they make sure that they hand off that piece of paper to somebody to enter it, a nurse leader generally, or they themselves go to find the kiosk and enter it. But it might have been hours that elapsed since then, and it's certainly not an efficient part of their workflow. So the design of DS Smart is really to save time by eliminating that second step in the process. You're still going to go take vitals the same way you always did, but now you're going to press a button and those vitals are going to be taken in immediately into the medical record. And there is no second step of going and find the kiosk or handing it off for somebody else to input the data. That in a time study we did in one of our first sites, we found a 24% time savings just in that vitals collection and documentation process. We're putting in a few enhancements right now, and that number will grow to about 40% time savings with just a couple enhancements that we learned through the process. Trust of data really is if I know vitals were taken before MedPass versus after MedPass, and I communicate that to the doc, that order of things, and have clarity on what exactly the vitals were and when they were taken, everybody in the healthcare system is going to trust that data more, especially knowing that the device itself had that reading and was transferred directly to the medical record. Obviously, that has better data means better decisions, means better clinical outcomes. In our design of this solution, we really wanted it to be part of the caregiver's normal workflow and be as integrated into that workflow as possible without creating something new and something different, which means it's easy to train on and easy to implement. So what is it? I've been talking a lot about something without really showing you what it is. So there is a vital sign monitor pictured here, and on a stand is a tablet. And that tablet can be mobile or it can be plugged in to that stand. But it has an app on it, and that app is DSmart. So you would walk into the room, and I'm going to show you a quick demo to show you how simple and straightforward it is and part of the workflow it is. So you walk into the room, you take the resident's vitals the same way you normally would. Then you open up the app, and I'm going to walk you through what that looks like. You use your point-click care credentials or matrix care credentials, whatever EMR you're using. In this case, point-click care. You put in your username and password that you already use for that EMR, and then it opens up the resident list screen. You find the resident of the vitals you're taking. You can scroll or type in and search. Either one works. And Rachel's picture pops up and her date of birth. And then you choose the device that you're connecting, the vital sign monitor you're connecting. You pull the readings in by pressing Get Readings. You check, make sure they look good. You add some detail around the reading. And then you confirm and send them to chart. When you see green check marks, that means it's in the medical record with a timestamp based on when you just sent it. Really straightforward, really part of the everyday workflow that those that are taking vitals in your buildings, either every shift or every day, already have to do. So what does this look like in the future? I showed you a brief demo with a vital sign monitor and a tablet, but this is really meant to be a platform to connect all the equipment that you invest in your building, whether it's a vital sign monitor or scale, whether it's a lift, piece of rehab equipment, modalities, peripherals, wearables, whatever they might be, and take the data, assign it to the resident involved, and then pass it to a medical record, whatever medical record makes sense, and do some decision support around that to make better clinical decisions over time. The last bit I wanted to talk about is some of you might be familiar with Direct Supply's TELS platform, which really is a platform for maintaining the building. And the way DSmart integrates into this platform is all the devices that I've talked about generally need calibration of some form or another, and generally have error codes or something that comes up on them. What DSmart is designed to do is to pull that device level data. When was I last calibrated? What's the most frequent error that comes up when using this? And pull it into our TELS platform in order for us to both coach our manufacturer partners and ourselves, if we're the ones manufacturing the equipment, and how usable each device is, but also provide calibration services to be able to say, these 3 devices in your building need calibration next month. Would you like to schedule somebody to come out and calibrate in your building? So that's a very quick overview on DS Smart, and I thought today was a really relevant webinar topic to tie into in order to introduce DS Smart. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to get a hold of us.
Thank you so much, Peter, for that great demonstration. And thank you again to Mark for presenting our webinar content today. If you have questions about the information or the products discussed, please reach out to webinars@directsupply.com. For more information about webinars, please visit directsupply.com/webinars. Once again, thank you for attending today.